Hey, what is up guys? Zilly here. And today's video I wanted to talk about Gley and all the active build I'm currently using into the game, because I've seen a lot of people actually commenting and asking questions on pretty old video now for Gley. So I wanted to talk about all the build I'm using and the last update we have currently in the game. Today we'll be discussing the 4 different builds I use in the game as Gley. Each build has its own specific uses and situations where it's most effective, along with its own advantages and disadvantages, which I'll talk you through. Like, let me introduce to our main board right there. I will also cover the difficulty of achieving and using each build. Chapters will be added to the video so you can easily navigate between the different loadouts at your convenience whenever you want. So first we're gonna talk about the Firearm Build, which can be used with Enduring Legacy or Greg, for example. Second, we're gonna talk about the regular Massacre Build. Then we'll talk about the all-in Massacre Build, so which is like one-click build. And lastly, we're gonna talk about the PvE build, the build I'm using like for any activities into the game, which is not Colossus. Okay, first we'll go over the Firearm Build. This build is currently at its maximum potential when you're using either Greg's Reversed Fate or the Enduring Legacy firearms. It can be used against any Colossus in the game, whether you're playing solo, with friends, or in matchmaking. One of its key advantages is that it offers the best survivability and doesn't require a strong reactor, as it doesn't rely on skin damage. This makes skill power actually irrelevant for this build. However, the downside of this build is that its DPS is fairly average to me, and it's definitely not the highest DPS build available for Gley. That said, it's pretty easy to use and simple to achieve and play. Alright, that's about it for the Firearm build. Now let's move on to the second build I introduced, which is the regular Massacre build. The goal of this build is to actually maintain an infinite ammo loop, allowing you to maximize the DPS at all time. It uses the Python firearm, enabling you to spray as many bullets as possible, as most of your damage comes from applying skill damage with each shot. This build works well against most bosses. However, I do not recommend using it along in long fights like Gluttony, especially in matchmaking, since you can't predict how long the battle will last. The main advantage of this build is its consistent DPS, as long as you have enough life to sustain the infinite ammo skill. On the downside, you'll need to manage your life carefully to keep the DPS going, which can be challenging in extended fight and for some players. In conclusion, this is a difficult build to me to use, and one of the most skill intensive options build. It really shines also when your character is fully optimized with Catalyst, so it makes a build for long-term advancement to actually get ready. You'll also need a good reactor to run this build effectively, so it requires a lot of things to get this build ready, but this is probably like the best DPS build we have so far with Gley currently in the game. Okay, moving on to the next build I introduce. I call it like the all-in Massacre build. I call it like that because you fully commit to maximizing a single sensory skill, infinite ammo. This build used the Python firearm and is designed for quickly taking down the first 4 hard Colossus bosses in solo queue. I refer to it as a all-in because the goal is to actually kill the Colossus within a 10-second window using your V skill. This setup delivers the highest possible DPS, but if you fail to defeat the Colossus in one magazine, then you're out of option. There's nothing you can do. The skill cooldown, it will be like super long. So it's to me an easy build to use, but it requires actually skill to meet its objective, which is essentially kill your target under 10 seconds or it's over. Things like that. Alright, and let's finish with the PvE build I'm currently using. We'll talk about that. If you're not familiar with it, build rely on spamming the massive sanctification transcendent module to actually deal damage and restore your health in the same time. There is no restriction on firearm for this build. I do personally use Tender Cage, but you can use almost like any weapon in the game. This build perform well in any activity, especially in operation and invasions, as it delivers a solid DPS over a wide area while also healing you simultaneously. Using a little trick I'll show you later in the video when we come into this section. You can also use the Massacre skill with it and have a good duration on the increased sensory skill if you're facing an elite or a end activity bosses. It's pretty easy to build and use, to be honest. We'll see. That's wrapped up the introduction to all the builds I'll showcase in this video. And so without any further delay, let's dive right in and start with the first build, the Firearm Build. Alright, as the name suggests, this build relies entirely on your firearm. Personally, I use two different weapons for this setup, the Greg's Reversed Fate and the Enduring Legacy. For the Greg build, I use Mental Focus since Sharp Precision Shot doesn't work with tactical rifles. Greg Reversed Fate is like the most powerful firearm you can use against Colossus bosses, as every bombardment triggered will match the damage of the shot that activated it. To maximize its efficiency, you'll need to fully upgrade the Greg unique ability, allowing every shot to trigger 7 bombs at the target location. So for example, if you land a critical weak point hit for 300,000 damage and trigger the unique ability on it, it will drop 7 bombs in a wide area, each of the bomb dealing 300,000 damage. For the Enduring Legacy build, I use Firearm Enhancement and Sharp Precision Shot. The fire effect helps triggering the firearm unique ability more frequently, while Sharp Precision Shot significantly boosts your fire rate. I usually activate one increased sensor skill to maximize the stack of Sharp Precision Shot while it's like Sting. Without reactivating it, I then unload the full 142 bullet magazine side of the firearm. This allows me to fire at the fastest rate possible the whole magazine, maximizing the DPS of the build. For this build, the reactor isn't very important as long as it has skill cooldown and skill duration on it, which are the only factor that matter for the increased sensor skills, since we're not relying on skill damage for this build. For external component, I switch between different sets depending on the situation and who I'm playing with. If you manage to have an Enzo on your team, you can use the Annihilation set. Otherwise, when you play solo, matchmaking, or just casual playing, I prefer to use the Acrobat set to boost my firearm critical hit rate. For the Descendant module in this build, we don't rely on any skill damage, which allow us to use shot focus and maximize duration modules, for example. The rest of the build focus on HP, defense, cooldown, and duration, and the tightrope module, which provide a firearm attack boost when your HP is below 50%, is actually pretty good. With this setup, I can perfectly loop the increased sensor skill as its cooldown match its duration. If you're using the Gley firearm, there aren't any ideal transcendent module for this build, so I do use the massive signification to deplete HP faster, allowing the tightrope module and the annihilation set to trigger quicker. If you're using Enduring Legacy firearm otherwise, Predator Instinct is the best in slot module. Please keep in mind that Predator Instinct does not work with Greg's firearm, which is why I don't use it in that case. Alright, that's pretty much it for the firearm build. Let's move on to the next build. Back to the main board, we are now going to talk about the second build, the regular Massacre Build. This build is probably the best for Gley, but also the hardest to master and achieve. It has many requirements and it's challenging to use. I'll try to cover everything about this build, but keep in mind that it has evolved significantly since we started using it. I believe we've reached its peak potential with the current meta and game version. The main goal of this build is to continuously loop your infinite ammo skill, ensuring a constant DPS. I do personally use the Python firearm for this build, although I won't dive into the debate about the Thunder Cage version. To me, it's similar to the Haley Piercing Light versus Afterglow debate, which isn't the focus of the video. I've always used and be a Python user, and I've built everything around it, so let's stick with it. The damage from looping the increased sensor skill with Massacre consists of two parts. First, you have the Python's bullet damage, which can be boosted through various methods like the Annihilation set, the Tightrope module, shot focus, having an Enzo or a Sharon on your team. That said, I prefer to focus on the second source of damage, which comes from skill damage. The highest of the two is actually the skill damage. It makes more sense to maximize this damage, right? So let's talk about the Python first. I use it because it currently has the fastest fire rate in the game. The faster you shoot, the higher your DPS will be, since it should apply also the skill damage alongside the bullet damage. There are two ways to build your Python, using either the mental focus module or the sharp precision shot module. Both are strong, but after extensive testing, I found that the sharp precision shot offer a better performance when pushed to its maximum capacity. However, it's not for everyone. Sharp precision shots significantly increase your rate of fire, allowing you to shoot roughly between 40 and 50 bullets per second at its maximum capacity. But depending on your FPS, yes, the FPS, the frame per second, the game may not register and apply all the bullet and skill damage if your FPS is too low. That sounds crazy, but this is how the game is developed and works. So if you're on a console or if you have a low FPS computer graphics, I'd recommend sticking with mental focus, as you'll need to play at least to around 120 plus FPS for sharp precision shot to function properly on the Python. If you're playing on a PC like I am, sharp precision shot perform at its best, and you'll want to maximize the duration of your increased sensor skill, stopping your fire to recast it and loop it just before the skill ends. To monitor this, I personally always keep an eye on the little green buff icon on the left side to know when to stop shooting and recast my skill. However, this requires a full focus, and sometimes I switch back to mental focus when I want to take it easy and chill playing. With the Python build explained, let's now dive into the how to maximize your skill damage for this build. Alright, first thing first, let's talk about the reactor. You'll want to prioritize damage against Colossus and skill cooldown reduction. The damage against Colossus, gold and or purple, is actually superior to gold non-attribute and gold dimension if you have both in your reactor. Like Colossus is better than the two other combined. As for the cooldown, you'll need at least the blue to ensure you can continuously loop the increased sensor skill. For the sets, I use the Slayer set to gain that extra 26% skill power on it. And for the Descendant module, this is the build I'm currently running, which gives me a 9.3 second duration on my increased sensory skill. I also use maximize duration on it to add an extra second to my unlimited ammo skill, despite the negative power modifier, since I'm running Python and sharp precision shot. This extra second let me fire roughly about 40 to 50 more bullets, and so the downside is actually absorbed by the extra second we get at the full fire rate of sharp precision shot. Alternatively, you can use the understanding advancement module. Especially, I recommend that if you're using mental focus for your Python. That's about it for the regular Massacre build. I've been using this build since the start of the game, and it has seen many tweaks and variations during the time. However, this is the most recent and optimized version. Now let's return to our main board and check out the next build I'll be showcasing. Alright, now let's move on to the next build. It's gonna be the all-in Massacre build. So this is a tweaked version of the regular Massacre build. It is boosted to the maximum potential, but with a massive downside, which is you are able to use only one time your increased sensor skill. However, I found this build pretty useful in some situation. I used this build before Haley to farm the first 4 hard bosses quickly, allowing me to gather materials faster and practice aiming at weak points during boss movements. This build relies on dealing damage within a 10-second window to kill the boss. The best strategy is to consume all your life before the boss spawns, which activates your Tritrope module and fully trigger the Annihilation set. At this point, you will have only enough life left to use your increased sensor skill once. For this build, the Python setup is the same as in the regular Massacre build, but you swap the 2 elemental modules to match the boss's weakness. For the reactor, I use Colossus damage and skill duration to extend the increased sensor skill, as cooldown reduction isn't necessary for this one. Regarding the sets, we use the Annihilation set to gain some duration and increase firearm attack. And for the Descendant modules, we go all in with 3 maximize modules: the maximize power, maximize skill, and maximize duration module. since cooldown isn't a priority. This setup gave me a 10-second window with full skill power and skill power modifiers for the increase in serious skill. To be honest, this build is still really strong if you don't have Aile to farm the first bosses on your own. That's pretty much it. Back to the main menu for the next build. Alright, so last build. This is gonna be the PvE build. This build is really strong in PvE and cover the majority of activity in the game right now. If you're not yet familiar with it, this build is all about spamming the massive sanctification transcendent module to deal significant damage to all enemies within a 35-meter radius around you. The damage is applied when you are in frenzy, but if you cast the skill while you're not in frenzy, it absorbs all life orb on the ground and draws life from enemies within, again, a 35-meter range. You can pair this with almost any firearm, though I prefer to use Tender Cage because it complements with my reactor, and honestly, Tender Cage in PvE, like, there's no need to talk about it. Anyway, this build performs exceptionally well in all activities, like operation and invasion, offering a strong area DPS while simultaneously healing you using a little trick I'll explain right now. I'm not entirely sure this is intended, but if you time it correctly, you can benefit from both the damage and the healing effect in the same skill cast. All you need to do is exit the frenzy state mid-skill. The best timing is right after you see the damage appearing on your screen, about 1 second before the healing trigger. This gives you a window to unfrenzy and gain health as if you had used the skill without being in frenzy at the first time. Timing is key on that, so practice until it becomes like a second nature to use that and do so. For this build, I personally use a reactor with skill critical hit damage, which is quite effective even though my critical hit rate isn't very high. You can increase critical hit rate on it as well. I also use skill cooldown reduction to get more cooldown reduction on my massive sanctification skill for a frequent use. For set, I use the Slayer set to boost the damage with the 26% skill power increase. Though you need to be cautious as it also raises the skill cost, so spamming skill require more careful management on your life. This is the build I use, and while there are many possible combinations, I found this one to be the most reliable overall. Focused on attribute and skill simplification boost skill power, while maximize range and skill expansion increase the range to 35 meters. You don't need skill range on your reactor since the cap is like 36 meters, so it won't be like it will be a waste to actually have that on the reactor. For cooldown reduction, I use Nimble Finger and MP conversion to reduce the cooldown of massive sanctification to a 4.9 seconds, and I do pair that with the multi-talented module, so you can actually spam it since it is a dimension skill. Lastly, I had some critical hit rate with emergency measure and skill insight. I do run with this build with like 10k HP and 12k defense in PvE, and since you can constantly heal yourself, I found that you don't need that much more. I've completed like, for example, all invasion content with this build without like much trouble. Finally, when you're facing a boss or an elite into your activity, like at the end, you can use the Massacre skill alongside Increased Sensory, which will give you a 5-second window for Massacre with a 10-second cooldown. So actually, it's pretty okay. And like for normal PvE content into hard mode, you need like two, maybe I never used, but maybe three Increased Sensory skill to finish the boss at the end, so it's pretty much okay. Alright, that's pretty much it, everyone. We've covered all the builds I'm using currently for Gley in this version of the game. I felt it was important to break everything down to bring everyone up to the last version of my builds. Right now I'm working on upgrading my Gley with full catalyst slots so I can freely equip any module in any slot. But with limited content available at the moment, I think it is something to work on while we wait for new updates. I hope you enjoyed the video. As always, if you have any insight, feedback or truth on these builds, feel free to drop a comment down below or join my Discord through the link you will find in the description of this video. Thank you all for tuning in, for the ongoing support, and for following me since I started posting video on the first Descendant. That's all for me today, and catch you on the next one. Peace!